McCubbin. Just want to thank Roxy so much for setting all these up. They're always great at times like this when we're all in isolation. They're really lifting my spirits up, watching so many amazing scientists and conservationists coming on to talk about the work that they're doing. Some great tips and just some amazing stories to hear from Ingray. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of an introduction to who I am, what I do. So my name is McCubbin. I am a zoologist, a TV presenter, as well as a campaigner and activist. I've always been totally fascinated with the world around me. My parents are really into the natural world, so I kind of grew up surrounded by my bedroom. Was honestly to take a look inside my bedroom as a kid, it was full of warthog skulls. I had cockroaches and tanks and praying mantises and everything. So for me, zoology was the only. Charlotte Corney, who is the founder of the Wild Heart Trust, and I started working there at aged 12. It's a sanctuary on the Isle of Wight Zoo that rescues big come in from circuses and other peckable rodent teeth, and I'd start kind of giving talks there and became I just loved it. I loved educating people about the animals that I'd grown to love, so it kind of started from there really for me, and I was really lucky that I was able to travel around the world and see a lot of the habitats and these amazing animals firsthand as well. But of course, when you're traveling around the world, you definitely do experience that we treat animals, and we do tend to treat them differently than we treat ourselves. Which it started really young, and I remember the first time that I saw a video of the bear bile market industry. I can't remember how old I was. I can't have been any older than about 12 years old, 12, 13 years old. This is probably not something that kids should be necessarily Googling on the internet, because sometimes it can be a little bit traumatic, the things that you see. But I wanted to learn. I felt like if I saw the hard stuff, I would be better educated and better able to protect these animals in the future. If we don't know what's going on, if we don't see the hard stuff, then we'll never learn the reality that these animals are facing, and we'll never learn how to help them. So that was always something that I felt really strongly. So I Googled, and something came up about bears. I was watching something about bears, and it came up about the bear bile market industry, and I was seeing cages and I had no idea what it was. So I did a lot of research on the bear bile farming, or I think the connection's a little bit not so good. If you guys are listening and there's a problem with the connection, let me know in the comments. I'll be able to see and I can move around and reshuffle a little bit. Nothing's coming through, so I'm assuming it's all okay, so I'm just going to carry on. I saw these kind of bears in rows in cages, and I just had no idea why bears would be in rows in cages. So I did a bit of research, and essentially what happens is, well, bears used to be caught in the wild and killed for their gallbladders. Now, in their gallbladder, you have something called bear bile. All mammals produce it, but particularly in bears, there is a really high concentration of something called UDCA acid. Now, I'm going to try and pronounce the full word. It's called urosodioxycholic acid. I'm really bad at my pronunciation. In fact, I'm so bad at my pronunciation that someone told me off pronouncing pronunciation wrong the other day, but there we go. So this was something that was sought after because it's a digestive fluid. It's held in the liver, produced by the gallbladder. Something that was sought after for use in traditional Chinese medicine. So bears up until the 1980s were killed in the wild. That was extracted and it was taken for use in these medicines then. However, from the 1980s, kind of house these bears and repeatedly take bile from them rather than having to kill them in the wild. And the idea there was that we would reduce poaching and we would maintain stable populations of these bears throughout Asia, because the demand for killing the bears for bile would be reduced. However, that would be beautiful. If you think of like Mickey Mouse with his gorgeous round ears, that's what Asiatic bears look like. I've always thought that maybe they were the inspiration on the IUCN Red List. In China, there's a few thousand, but it's character. And they're not so big, but they're just big enough to be able to reproduce bile at an efficient rate. And they're not going to be as big and as expensive as brown bears to keep, and they're not too small as the sun bears. So those are the primary, the major species. The extraction process is something that's really, really difficult. Basically, you can have repeated drainage where there's a catheter inserted into the stomach of the bear, into the abdomen, and it will be a constant flow in this bag, and they have to wear this metal jacket all their lives. They're kept in difficult it is for these bears, the psychological stress, the physiological stress, the hate, and they live in real conditions. But there is a hero of mine that I wanted to talk about. She's just a remarkable woman who in 1998 started the Animals Asia Foundation. Her name, of course, is Jill Rinson. Now, she moved into Hong Kong, where she started working for various animal charities. I went down this dark, she held the bear's hand. The bear wasn't being aggressive. It just looked desperately into her eyes, wanting help. So that is why Animals Asia started in 1998, and since then they've rescued hundreds of bears from the bear bar farming industry, and I was determined that I had to go and see it for myself. So a few years ago I went over there. I worked in one of the sanctuaries to help rehabilitate these bears towards other members of her group. So my job was to work out why these bears were behaving aggressively and what I could do to change that, if I could change something in their large enclosure. I have to say their enclosures are spectacular. Of all the captive places I've seen, they have some of the best enclosures and best enrichment programs for these bears to keep them entertained and to keep them happy. About how forgiving they could be. They would just come up to you, they would talk to you. I mean, considering the years and years of pain and suffering that they went through at the hands of humans, they were so forgiving and so wonderful. Their characters are fantastic. I mean, you'd walk past and they'd all be sitting in trees. Asiatic bears are fast, climb up to the top of trees to get browse and various things to feed on. I used to call them spider bears because they were just, if you've ever seen the Simpsons movie, Spider Pig, spider bears, because they'd be walking upside down, all this kind of stuff on these branches. They were great animals to be. So we know that this is a really difficult thing for bears to Asia, all across Asia. There's an estimated 12,000. In Vietnam, there's 2,000. So numbers vary from country to country, and indeed practices of bear bar farming varies between country to country. So I left Animals Asia after working for 4 months there, and I was intoxicated by these animals. I'd never thought of working with bears before. I went there and I've just totally fallen in love with them. They are such amazing animals, and I didn't want to come home and forget about it. I mean, I would never forget about it, but I wanted to continue on the work and try and help rescuing these animals. So a year later, I got the most amazing opportunity to film a documentary for BBC Three called Undercover Tourist. I filmed one episode of this series, and it was all about bear bar farming. Now, when I did my volunteer placement at Animals Asia, I was working with bears that had been rehabilitated. I had never been there's a bit of a struggle with the connection. I'm going to see if I can move a little bit. Hang on a minute. Let's see. Let me know if the connection improves. I'm moving a little bit closer. Let's see how this goes. You might be able to hear poodles in the background, so I do apologise for that. Is that any better? I'll wait till you start coming in. So after Animals Asia, I went on and filmed this documentary, and this was an unusual experience for me because I hadn't been to a farm before. I'd never seen the direct cruelty that these bears were suffering. In fact, I'm just going to sit on the floor because there we go. I've got my notes and stuff. I hadn't seen actually these farms firsthand, so it was a little bit of a shock for me. And the idea behind the documentary was, as tourists, could we go in and could we see evidence of bear bile farming directly? How easy is it? In Vietnam, it was illegal to farm bears for their bile, and it still is. In fact, recently, only in last 2 years or so, Vietnam have announced that they are aiming to close bear bile farming once and for all, which is fantastic. There was a legal loophole, though, that you could keep bears captive. You were allowed to have them. Some people even had bears in cages in their kitchens, especially in their garages and things. You could have 30, 40 bears, which seems like absolutely mad. But you weren't actually allowed. So you could keep them, but you couldn't extract bile. But bears are an expensive thing to keep. They require a lot of maintenance, as I said earlier. They have to be fed this antibiotic food to keep the infection away. They eat a lot. They really do. Bears eat a lot of food, so they're not an expensive animal to keep. And why would you have a bear if you weren't going to be extracting bile from it and getting some kind of economical value back? So there is all that question. Now, in China, it's totally legal. You can still farm bears for bile, and in fact, in China, some of the conditions there are the worst possible for bear bile farming. But Animals Asia is making great headway on that and working really closely with the government to put an end to the practice. Bear bile itself, UDCA, this acid that I was talking about, which is the main component in the bear bile itself. It is used for various different things. It's used as an anti-inflammatory, it's used to treat liver disease, and it's used to dissolve gallbladder stones. I hate to say it, I really hate to say it, but the properties of it do work. It is effective at reducing those symptoms. However, and this is a big however, there are better synthetic alternatives available, much better synthetic alternatives available. The majority of people use bear bile not as an anti-inflammatory, not as a cure for liver disease, but they actually use it for men's libidos. They mix it with vodka, and it's meant to help get you in the mood, which a lot of traditional medicine seems to be for, but there is no evidence to suggest that works at all. Now, of course, we are in the midst of a current corona crisis, so there's been a lot of news about animal markets. There's been lots of confusion, I think, about where this virus has come from, exactly in terms of what species it come from, the pathway, the genetic pathways of this virus. And it's really interesting to look at the biology of it and the way that viruses behave. So there's been a lot of focus on wet markets. Now, I want to explain exactly what wet animal markets are. Wet markets simply mean a market that sells wild animals with a wet floor. Now, when you're selling lots of animals, you might have seen photos from across the news of animals piled up high. Of course, there is a lot of fecal matter. There's a lot of mess that comes with that. So wet markets are simply named wet markets because they are constantly having to wash down the floors because they want to limit the spread of diseases and the emergence of viruses. But of course, we can't always avoid that given the current crisis today. Of course, we know this. So we believe that the coronavirus came from Wuhan animal market. It was actually a fish market in China. There is some confusion about this because actually the people that were diagnosed with coronavirus first didn't actually have any contact with this seafood market. So there is a bit of discussion going on there of exactly how they contracted the virus. So cross-species transmission is a really interesting thing. So these viruses that can jump from species to species are called zoonoses. So they will jump between humans and animals. Coronaviruses themselves, so this virus is called COVID-19, but coronaviruses are a whole strand of various different viruses. So these are ones that can jump from human to animals, but they cause respiratory illness. So COVID-19 is the specific one that we're facing at the moment. We have seen coronaviruses before, for example, SARS in 2002, which originated in southern China. It affected 26 countries. There were 8,000 cases and 774 deaths. And we know now that has come from the consumption of bats. So when we're looking at the genetic code of the coronavirus, virologists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology have basically coded the genetic matter of this virus, and we found, we get this right, that there's a 96% identical genetic code to a coronavirus that is found in bats. So it's highly likely that the coronavirus has evolved from bats. We know that bats are eaten widely across China. 64 species, in fact, are eaten in China, but it's not the only place. For example, in Africa, 55 species of bat are eaten. There's never been a popular delicacy in Europe or in America. But we know that across various areas, bats are really popular. I don't know if you've seen those videos of bats in soups and things that are coming around at the moment. But it's been something that we've done for centuries, actually. So we've always eaten bats in various places. But there's also been rumours that the coronavirus actually originated from pangolins. Now, I don't know if you know what pangolins are. Pangolins they almost look prehistoric. They're these mammals that are covered in scales. They live in parts of Asia and Africa. They're small mammals. They feed on termites. And they are the most trafficked animal in the world. They're captured because they're covered in these scales, which are ground down into a powder. Their meat is also considered a delicacy, so we do consume their meat as well, but it's the most trafficked animal in the world, and they are highly endangered, highly secretive, and very, very special little animals. But there is a coronavirus that exists within pangolins, and this coronavirus is somewhere between 88.5 to 92.4% genetically similar to the coronavirus COVID-19 that we have today. So it's highly likely that this virus did come from bats, but there is potential there that it also originated from pangolin too. But I don't want to make this, I'm being very careful about the words that I'm using, because we have lots of issues in terms of animal welfare all around the world that we really need to focus our attention to. For example, intensive factory farming, or fur markets, for example. These are also places where viruses can evolve and can spread. Areas where you have a high concentration of wild animals, where hygiene isn't a top priority. I've seen inside some fur farms on various different videos. I've seen, intensive agriculturing practices. Some places the hygiene is just non-existent, and this is where viruses really come into their own, and they evolve very, very quickly, and they will spread very, very fast as well. So, for example, swine flu epidemic 2009, that came from pigs and poultry, and it originated in Mexico. We've got bird flu that came from China again, things like chickens that originated from. Mad cow disease actually originated in British herds in the 1980s. These cows were fed animal remains, and then we eat the cows, and that is how that transmission came. So we need to be looking at how we're treating these animals all together. If we have a high abundance of wild animals, then we need to be really careful about our hygiene. And in terms of kind of having these wild animal markets, we really now need to be shutting them down. There is no excuse for having wild animal markets anymore, not with when we can harvest our food sustainably and safely. Coronavirus at the moment, I just looked online just before I went live to make sure I had the most accurate figures available. So there is 786,876 cases at the moment, and there's been 37,000 deaths. It's a really scary time, and for anyone that's isolated, it's something that's really hard to compare to. I mean, not knowing what the future holds and when this is going to die down is something that's very, very worrying for lots of different people. I'm going to bring it back round to bears now. So the coronavirus is going to have an impact on bear bile farming. On March the 4th, China's National Health Commission issued a statement and released a list of treatments that could be used to help coronavirus, and included in that statement was bear bile injections and bear bile powder. Injections were recommended for people with severe corona symptoms, and powder was recommended for those with mild symptoms. Now, this is a bit of a contradiction. In January 2020, Wuhan Animal Market was closed down immediately because that's obviously where the virus originated from. We're kind of in a vicious cycle where these viruses are emerging, and to treat them, we're using more wild animals, which are kept in more intensive conditions, which could potentially spread more viruses and everything else. There's no evidence that bear bile will really impact, will act as a cure for the coronavirus. It certainly won't get rid of it. It might alleviate some of the symptoms because of its anti-inflammatory properties from that UDCA acid. However, it will not cure it. And as I said earlier, there are better synthetic alternatives that will help alleviate the symptoms of corona. In 1989, China's wildlife protection law states that wild animals are a resource for us to be able to use, and that's something that we really need to start talking about. We need to collectively work as a movement, and something I get asked all the time that I struggle with is, we need to be talking to China and countries in Asia with bad animal welfare. Why we shouldn't change what we're doing here because they're doing stuff worse over there. And I think that's a really dangerous mindset to have. We can all be doing something here, whether that's turning our attention to the industrial practices that we have here with animals, and we can all be doing better. We can all be doing more, but certainly we definitely need to be very kind of, well, not critical is the wrong word, but we need to really think carefully about the future of wild animal markets, particularly those selling endangered animals that shouldn't exist anyway. For the protection of these animals, we need it to stop now, and for the protection of humanity too. So I'm just going to end on a couple notes as well. I think we need better education globally, really, is the most important thing. We need to understand how wild animals can impact us for the better, how they enrich our lives, not how they're resources, not how they're something for us to use, but how they safeguard our own survival and how they can provide us with benefits to our mental health and our physiological health as well. So better education as well as just thinking very critically now, moving ahead. We need to shut wild animal markets down. We know this, um, but it's a case of not pointing the finger too much. We want to make sure that this is a global movement and we're all working cooperatively together and being kind to one another. That's really important. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I just want to say thank you for everyone tuning in. I'm glad that the connection seems to be a little bit better. If you have any questions, put them up and I will answer them after I've gone off live. I hope it's been informative and you've enjoyed it all. And look forward to the rest of these clips coming up on Roxy's channel as well. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Oh, one more thing, sorry. I've been reading this book. It is amazing. If you'd like to get an understanding of kind of investigative work in the animal trade, not as nature intended by Rich Hardy. I mean, you won't be able to put it down. It is something that will make you cry. It is something that will make you laugh. It is hard hitting and honest. So this is a book. If you can get your hands on this, please do. It's an amazing, amazing book. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye.